Hello and welcome. My name is Alan, and we are back for part 2 of Atomic War or Peace by Albert Einstein. The last video for Albert Einstein, I read part 1. Part 2 is going to be a bit longer, 9 pages in all, so bear with me. Here we go. Since the completion of the first atomic bomb, nothing has been accomplished to make the world more safe from war, while much less has been done to increase the destructiveness of war. I am not able to speak from any first-hand knowledge about the development of the atomic bomb, since I do not work in this field. But enough has been said by those who do to indicate that the bomb has been made more effective. Certainly, the possibility can be envisaged of building a bomb of far greater size, capable of producing destruction over a larger area. It also is credible that an extensive use could be made of radioactivated gases, which would spread over a wide region, causing heavy loss of life without damage to buildings. I do not believe it is necessary to go on beyond these possibilities to contemplate a vast extension of bacteriological warfare. I am skeptical that this form presents dangers comparable with those of atomic warfare. Nor do I take into account a danger of starting a chain reaction of a scope great enough to destroy part or all of this planet. I dismiss this on the ground that if it could happen from a man-made atomic explosion, it would already have happened from the action of the cosmic rays which are continually reaching the Earth's surface. But it is not necessary to imagine the Earth being destroyed like a nova by a stellar explosion to understand vividly the growing scope of atomic war and to recognize that unless another war is prevented, it is likely to bring destruction on a scale never before held possible and even now hardly conceived, and that little civilization would survive it. In the first 2 years of the atomic era, another phenomenon is to be noted. The public, having been warned of the horrible nature of atomic warfare, has done nothing about it, and to a large extent has dismissed the warning from its consciousness. A danger that cannot be averted had perhaps better be forgotten, for a danger against which every possible precaution has been taken also had probably better be forgotten. That is, if the United States had dispersed its industries and decentralized its cities, it might be reasonable for people to forget the peril they face. I should say parenthetically that it is well that this country has not taken the precautions For to have done so would make atomic war still more probable, since it would convince the rest of the world that we are resigned to it and are preparing for it. But nothing has been done to avert war, while much has been done to make atomic war more horrible. So there is no excuse for ignoring the danger. I say that nothing has been done to avert war since the completion of the atomic bomb, despite the proposal for supernatural national control of atomic energy put forward by the United States in the United Nations. This country has made only a conditional proposal, and on conditions which only a conditional or with the Soviet Union, in which is now determined not to accept. This makes it possible to blame the failure on the Russians. But in blaming the Russians, the Americans should not ignore the fact that they themselves are not voluntarily have not voluntarily renounced the use of the bomb as an ordinary weapon in the time before the achievement of supranational control, or if supranational control is not achieved. Thus, they have fed the fear that other countries that they consider the bomb a legitimate part of their arsenal, so long as other countries decline to accept their terms for supranational control. Americans may be convinced that their determination not to launch an aggressive or preventative war, so they may believe it is superfluous to announce publicly that they will not a second time be the first to use the atomic bomb. But this country has been solemnly invited to renounce the use of the bomb, that is, to outlaw it, and has declined to do so unless its terms for supranational control are accepted. I believe this policy is a mistake. I see a certain military gain from not renouncing the use of the bomb, in that this may be deemed to restrain another country from starting a war in which the United States might use it. But what is gained in one way is lost in another. For an understanding over the supranational control of atomic energy has been made more remote. This may be no military drawback so long as the United States has the exclusive use of the bomb. But the moment another country is able to make it in substantial quantities, the United States loses greatly through the absence of an international agreement because of the vulnerability of its concentrated industries and its highly developed urban life. In refusing to outlaw the bomb while having the monopoly on it, this country suffers in another respect, in that it fails to return publicly to the ethical standards of warfare formerly accepted previous to the last war. It should not be forgotten that the atomic bomb was made in this country as a preventative measure. It was to head off its use by the Germans if they discovered it. The bombing of civilian centers was initiated by the Germans and adopted by the Japanese. To it, the Allies responded in kind, as it turned out, with greater effectiveness, and they were morally justified in doing so. But now, without any provocation, and without the justification of reprisal or retaliation, a refusal to outlaw the use of the bomb, save in reprisal, is making a political purpose of its possession. This is hardly pardonable. I am not saying that the United States should not manufacture and stockpile the bomb, for I believe that it must do so. It must be able to deter another nation from making an atomic attack when it also has the bomb. But deterrence should be the only purpose of the stockpile of bombs. In the same way, I believe that the United Nations should have the atomic bomb when it is supplied with its own armed forces and weapons. But it too should have the bomb for the sole purpose of deterring an aggressor or rebellious nations from making an atomic attack. It should not use the atomic bomb on its own initiative any more than the United States or another power should do so. To keep a stockpile of atomic bombs without promising not to initiate its use is exploiting the possession of the bombs for political ends. It may be that the United States hopes in this way to frighten the Soviet Union into accepting supranational control of atomic energy, but the creation of fear only heightens antagonism and increases the danger of war. I am of the opinion that this policy has detracted from the very real virtue in the offer of inspirational control of or supranational control of atomic energy. We have emerged from a war in which we had to accept the degradingly low ethical standards of the enemy. But instead of feeling liberated from these standards and set free to restore the sanctity of human life and the safety of non-combatants, we are in effect making the low standards of the enemy in this last war our own after the present. Thus, we are starting toward another war degraded by our own choice. It may be that the public is not fully aware that in another war, atomic bombs will be available in large quantities. It may measure the dangers in the terms of the 3 bombs exploded before the end of the last war. The public may also may not appreciate that in relation to the damage inflicted, atomic bombs already have become the most economical form of destruction that can be used on the offensive. In another war, the bombs will be plentiful and they will be comparatively cheap. Unless there is determination not to use them, that is far stronger than can be noted today among American political and military leaders, and on the part of the public itself. Atomic warfare will be hard to avoid. Unless Americans come to recognize that they are not stronger in the world because they have the bomb, but weaker because of their vulnerability to atomic attack, they are not likely to conduct their policy at lake success or in their relations with Russia in a spirit that furthers the arrival at an understanding. But I do not suggest that the Americans' failure to outlaw the use of the bomb, except in retaliation, is the only cause of the absence of an agreement with the Soviet Union over atomic control. The Russians have made it clear that they will do everything in their power to prevent a supranational regime from coming into existence. They not only reject it in the range of atomic energy, they reject it sharply on principle, and thus have spurned in advance my overture to join a limited world government. Mr. Gromyko has rightly said that the essence of the American atomic proposal is that the national sovereignty is not compatible with the atomic era. He declares that the Soviet Union cannot accept this thesis. The reasons he gives are obscure, for they quite obviously are pretexts. But what seems to be true is that the Soviet leaders believe they cannot preserve the social structure of the Soviet state in the supranational regime. The Soviet government has determined to maintain its present social structure, and the leaders of Russia, who hold their great power through the nature of that structure, will spare no effort to prevent a supranational regime from coming into existence to control atomic energy or anything else. The Russians may be partly right about the difficulty of retaining their present social structure in a supranational regime, though in time they may be brought to see that this is a far lesser loss than remaining isolated from a world of law. But at present, they appear to be guided by their fears. And one must admit that the United States has made ample contributions to these fears, not only as to atomic energy, but in many other respects. Indeed, this country has conducted its Russian policy as though it were convinced that fear is the greatest of all diplomatic instruments, that the Russians are striving to prevent the formation of a supranational security system is no reason why the rest of the world should not work to create one. It has been pointed out that the Russians have a way of resisting with all their arts that they do not wish to have happen. But once it happens, they can be flexible and accommodate themselves to it. So it would do well for the United States and other powers not to permit the Russians to veto an attempt to create supranational security. They can proceed with some hope that once the Russians see they cannot prevent such a regime, they may join it. So far as the United States has shown no interest in preserving the security of the Soviet Union, it has been interested in its own security, which is characteristic of the competition which marks the conflict for power between the sovereign states. But one cannot know in advance what would be the effect on Russian fears if the American people forced their leaders to pursue a policy of substituting law for the present anarchy of international relationships. In a world of law, Russian security would be equal to our own. And for the American people to espouse this wholeheartedly, something that should be possible under the workings of democracy, might work a kind of miracle in Russian thinking. At present, the Russians have no evidence to convince them that the American people are not contentedly supporting a policy of military preparedness which they regard as a policy of deliberate intimidation. If they had evidences of a passionate desire by Americans to preserve peace in the one way it can be maintained by a supranational regime of law, this would upset Russian calculations about the peril of Russian security in current trends of American thought. Not until a genuine, convincing offer is made to the Soviet Union, backed by an aroused American public, will one be entitled to say what the Russian response would be. It may be that this first response would be to reject the world of law. But if from the moment it began to be clear to the Russians that such a world was coming into existence without them, and that their own security was being increased, their ideas necessarily would change. I am in favor of inviting the Russians to join a world government authorized to provide security, and if they are unwilling to join, to proceed to establish supranational security without them. Let me admit quickly that I see great peril in such a course. If it is adopted, it must be done in a way to make it utterly clear that the new regime is not a combination of power against Russia. It must be a combination that, by its composite nature, will greatly reduce the chances of war. It will be more diverse in its interests than in any single state, thus less likely to resort to aggressive or preventative war. It will be larger, hence stronger than any single nation. It will be geographically much more extensive and thus more difficult to defeat by military means. It will be dedicated to supranational security and thus escape the emphasis on national supremacy, which is so strong a factor in war. If a supranational regime is set up without Russia, its service to peace will depend on the skill and sincerity with which it is done. Emphasis should always be apparent on the desire to have Russia take part. It must be clear to Russia, and no less so to the nations comprising the organization, that no penalty is incurred or implied because a nation declines to join. If the Russians do not join at the outset, they must be sure of a welcome when they do decide to join. Those who create the organization must understand that they are building with the final objective of attaining Russian adherence. These are the abstractions, and it is easy to outline the specific lines a partial world government must follow to induce the Russians to join. But two conditions are clear to me. The new organization must have no military secrets, and the Russians must be free to have observers at every session of the organization where its new laws are drafted, discussed, and adopted, and where its policies are decided. That would destroy the great factory of secrecy where so many of the world's suspicions are manufactured. It may affront the military-minded person to suggest a regime that does not maintain any military secrets. He has been taught to believe that secrets thus divulged would enable a war-minded nation to seek to conquer the earth. As to the so-called secret of the atomic bomb, I am assuming the Russians will have this through their own efforts within a short time. I grant there is a risk in not maintaining military secrets. If a sufficient number of nations have pooled their strength, they can take this risk, for their security will be greatly increased, and it can be done with greater assurance because of the decrease of fear, suspicion, and distrust that will result. The tensions of the increasing likelihood of war in a world based on sovereignty would be replaced by the relaxation of the growing confidence in peace. In time, this might so allure the Russian people that their leaders would mellow in their attitude toward the West. Membership in a supranational security system should not, in my opinion, be based on the arbitrary democratic standards. The one requirement from all should be that the representatives to the supranational organization, assembly, and council must be elected by the people in each member country through a secret ballot. These representatives must represent the people rather than any government, which would enhance the pacific nature of the organization. To require that other democratic criteria be met is, I believe, inadvisable. Democratic institutions and standards are the result of historic developments to an extent not always appreciated in the lands which enjoy them. Setting arbitrary standards sharpens the ideological differences between the Western and Soviet systems. But it is not the ideological differences which now are pushing the world in the direction of war. Indeed, if all the Western nations were to adopt socialism while maintaining their national sovereignty, it is quite likely that the conflict of power between East and West would continue. The passion expressed over the economic systems of the present seems to me quite irrational. Whether the economic life of America should be dominated by relatively few individuals, as it is, or these individuals should be controlled by the state, may be important, but it is not important enough to justify all of the feelings that are stirred up over it. I should wish to see all the nations forming the supranational state pool in their military forces, keeping for themselves only local police. Then I should like to see these forces commingled and distributed as were the regiments of the former Austro-Hungarian Empire. There, it was appreciated that the men and officers of one region would serve the purposes of empire better by not being stationed exclusively in their own provinces, subject to local and racial pools. I should like to see the authority of the supranational regime restricted altogether to the field of security. Whether this would be possible, I am not sure. Experience may point to the desirability of adding some authority over economic matters, since under modern conditions these are capable of causing national upsets that have in them the seeds of violent conflict. But I should prefer to see the function of the organization altogether limited to the tasks of security. I also should like to see this regime established through the strengthening of the United Nations, so as not to sacrifice continuity in the search for peace. I do not hide from myself the great difficulties of establishing a world government, either a beginning without Russia or one with Russia. I am aware of the risks. Since I should not wish it to be permissible for any country that has joined the supranational organization to secede, one of these tasks is a possible civil war, or one of these risks is a possible civil war. But I also believe that world government is certain to come in time, and that the question is how much it is to be permitted to cost. It will come, I believe, even if there is another world war. Although after such a war, if it is won, it would be world government established by the victor, resting on the victor's military power, and thus to be maintained permanently only through the permanent militarization of the human race. But I also believe it can come through agreements and through the force of persuasion. But I also believe it can come through agreements and through the force of persuasion alone, hence at low cost. But if it is to come in this way, it will not be enough to appeal to reason. One strength of the communist system of the East is that it has some of the character of a religion that inspires the emotions of a religion. Unless the cause of peace based on law gathers behind it the force of and zeal of a religion, it hardly can hope to succeed. Those to whom the moral teaching of the human race is entrusted surely have a great duty and a great opportunity. The atomic scientists, I think, have become more convinced that they cannot arouse the American people to the truth of the atomic era by logic alone. There must be added that deep power of emotion, which is a basic ingredient of religion. It is to be hoped that not only the churches, but the schools, the colleges, and the leading organs of opinion will acquit themselves well of their unique responsibility in this regard. So, yeah. But Einstein still talking about the need to form a peace between the US and Russia in the now atomic age. Because you remember, we're looking at this just post World War II, because he said it was 2 years since the Great War. So America and the rest of the world is trying to come to terms. But we're already forming this policy of mutual destruction, which Einstein is warning against. And of course, with mutual destruction, it's like you drop bombs, then we'll make sure you go with us. And that's what kept America and Russia at peace, knowing that the other could drop just as many bombs. Of the atomic variety. But yeah. I told you that was a long one. But I'm going to end this video here. As always, educate thyself, think, read, study, learn. Someone tries to tell you something you have trouble believing, ask them to cite their sources. I'll see you all in the next video. Until then, later.